Necromancer has quickly become one of my favorite classes in Diablo 4, and I'm really excited to share my first Necromancer build. This Bone Spear build is incredibly powerful, absolutely amazing for leveling through the game, as well as progressing through endgame content. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can change things up depending on the situation that you're in to either get more DPS, more survivability, or just have a little bit more fun. I love how versatile this build is, and the damage it outputs is absolutely bananas. I spent so much longer playing Barbarian than I have Necromancer, and my Necromancer is already significantly more powerful. We're going to be taking use of Decrepify, Corpse Explosion, Corpse Tendrils, Bone Storm, Blood Mist, and of course Bone Spear. We're going to be focusing on casting Decrepify to slow our targets as well as potentially get some cooldown reduction. Once we get a corpse, we can activate Corpse Tendrils to draw them all in. We can also use Corpse Explosion to drastically increase our damage when we need to. The thing I love most about this is how versatile it is and how many different ways you can go about combat. If you want to, you can also swap out Corpse Explosion for Bone Prison for higher tier dungeons, which can come in incredibly useful. We are going to be sacrificing all of our minions for this particular build. It's a bit of a bummer, but the bonuses you get are incredibly useful. We're going to be sacrificing our skirmishers for increased critical strike damage, our skeletal mages for shadow to increase our maximum essence, and our golems for iron to get increased critical strike damage. Don't worry though, I will be making a future minion build that is truly awesome. For our equipment, we're going to be using the Deathless Visage. Although as you get to higher tier nightmare dungeons, we're going to be swapping this out for a regular helmet that's going to be focusing on total armor, maximum life, cooldown reduction, and maximum essence. And we're going to have a defensive aspect on here. Most likely, basic skills increase your damage reduction by 20%. For our chest piece, we're focused on bone skill damage, physical damage, total armor, and damage reduction. We also have each time Bone Storm damages an enemy, gain a barrier equal to 5% of your base life for 10 seconds. Now I'm using this kind of for my speed running to be able to get to level 100, but for higher tiers, you're going to focus more on maximum life, total armor, and all sorts of damage reduction. I run a couple different gloves in this build. This one I focused on critical strike with bone skills, a 5% chance to restore our primary resource, which believe it or not is amazing, increased critical strike chance, and 4 ranks of Bone Spear. This is what I consider the perfect pair of gloves if you never really want to have to worry about essence, which since the majority of our Bone Spear damage comes from having high levels of essence, these gloves are absolutely amazing. There's a couple different imprints that you can put on these gloves. I chose to go with Edge Masters for this, but depending on the situation, I really like Bone Storm consumes up to 8 corpses to increase its duration by up to 8 seconds. Not only are you reducing the cooldown on your Bone Storm to be able to get more crit chance and defense, as well as barrier, but since you're consuming corpses, you're also going to be getting all of the damage increases from consuming corpses, which can be incredibly useful. And quite frankly, having Bone Storm and that damage increase at the same time is huge. Now, if for some reason you don't want the primary resource on here, I would either go for flat out intelligence or attack speed. I really like the intelligence boost because it does actually add a lot of damage to it, but attack speed is also really good, so either of those are a good option. For our pants, we're going flat out damage reduction and increased health. So we got total armor, maximum life, damage reduction from close enemies, and regular damage reduction, as well as disobedience on here for the increased up to 50% more armor. For our boots, I went with ranks of corpse tendrils, movement speed, all stats, and intelligence. I wanted the all stats on here to help unlock stuff on our Paragon board, and the 63 intelligence is basically increasing our damage by an extra 6%. If you combine that with the all stats, we're actually getting 8% increased damage from this. You can see that when we overlay on intelligence, we currently have 78% increased damage from our skills. Take these boots off, we now have 69. Now a lot of you might be asking, why am I not going for essence cost reduction? That's probably a good question. Right now my Bone Spear costs 19. I've got a max roll of essence cost reduction on my necklace. Well, almost max. If I had it max, I believe this Bone Spear would go down to 18. And if I put this maximum essence cost reduction on my boots on, my Bone Spear only goes down to 17. So for losing 6% damage, I'm only getting 2 essence cost reduction. I personally don't think that's worth it since I have so much essence all the time. I'd rather have the increased 6% damage, but that's going to be completely up to you. On here, I also have Blood Mist triggers Corpse Explosion on surrounding corpses and reduces its cooldown. I have this on here because it's going to trigger that consumption of corpses as well, which is going to increase my damage. My two-hand weapon, I just went for the highest item power that I could. I haven't found any other good weapons. I don't know how I've been so unlucky. I have vulnerable damage on here, intelligence, core skill damage, and damage to crowd control. It's not as good as if I had increased critical strike damage and increased critical strike damage with bone skills, but the core skill damage is good, and since we're crowd controlling stuff all the time, the bonuses on here are actually not that bad. Putting splintering on your two-hand weapon is almost required. It's going to make enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable, and having that extra damage from your bone spears can really help kill lots of enemies really quickly. There is room to mess around if you want to put this on a necklace, but I really think it should go on your two-hand weapon. On our necklace, we have the Serration aspect, where the Ossified Essence key passive also increases the critical strike damage of your bone skills by 1% per essence above 50, up to 60% more damage. Since we're doing so much damage, I very rarely get to use corpse tendrils, unless we're in much higher tier content, so I really wanted to put the extra damage on my necklace. So on my ring, I did decide to go ahead and put the corpse tendrils aspect on here, where we get increased critical strike chance, as well as increased critical strike damage when they are hit with the corpse tendrils. But what's nice about the increased critical strike chance is you get that when you cast it, so they don't actually have to be hit by it. Now the stats on our necklace, I'm a little iffy here on what I've done. I've got damage reduction from close enemies, 3 ranks of Evulsion, which I really like, increased movement speed, and essence cost reduction. I would like to have essence cost reduction and cooldown reduction on here, and I really recommend getting cooldown reduction because it's going to help this build flow a lot better. I just have not been able to get a really good necklace. I'm iffy on if I would replace the damage reduction on here or the movement speed. So there's a couple different ways you can change this up, but getting essence cost and cooldown reduction and Evulsion is really good. On our rings, I decided to go with critical strike damage, critical strike chance, and increased critical strike damage with bone skills, as well as maximum essence. The exposed flesh primary aspect is so unbelievably necessary to keep your essence up. If you've got the thing on your gloves with the primary resource, it's going to help a lot and will really help you until you actually roll this primary aspect here. But what it does is regenerate your essence when hitting vulnerable enemies with your bone skills. I'm also kind of torn on the maximum essence here. I almost think having vulnerable damage would be better since we could get it up to 30% increased vulnerable damage. And since Ossified Essence only caps out at 60, anything above 50, we're only gaining 1% increased damage because we're not actually doubling down on Ossified Essence once you have enough bonus maximum essence. So I feel like at a certain point we start losing effectiveness here on the maximum essence, but I still keep it on here for now. I did, however, decide to take it off my other ring. I went with vulnerable damage, critical strike damage. I would have liked to have critical strike damage with bone skills, but I got damage to crowd control instead, as well as critical strike damage. And this is where we put our corpse tendrils aspect. Now for the abilities. There's a lot of different ways that you can change all of this up, but we do have to have at least 2 points in a basic skill. So I've got bone splinters and enhanced bone splinters. Then we've got 3 points into unliving energy, as well as imperfectly balanced. 5 points plus 4 from our gloves into bone spear, enhanced bone spear, and paranormal bone spear, so we get those extra additional bone shards, which are huge. I've got 1 point into blood mist and 1 point into a corpse explosion. Depending on what you're doing and how much damage you're doing, you might want to go into enhanced blood mist as well as ghastly blood mist. What you can do is when you're leveling up, you can use your blood mist to form a corpse, which then you can activate with corpse tendrils to be able to gather up all of your enemies and kill them. I did that a lot while I was leveling up, and it's really useful. I then have 1 point into Grim Harvest and 3 into Fueled by Death. If you want to use your corpse explosion for gaining essence, you can take some of these points out of Death's Embrace if you want, but I like having the increased close damage as well as damage reduction. You could put some of those points into Grim Harvest if you want. I then have 3 points into Amplify Damage, 3 points into Death's Reach, 1 into Decrepify, Enhanced Decrepify, and Abhorrent, so that way we can get a chance to reduce our cooldowns. I have 1 point into Corpse Tendrils plus 4 from my boots. Then we have Enhanced Corpse Tendrils and Plagued, so that way they can become vulnerable. If you want to run Blood Orb stuff, you can also use the Blood Orb version of this, but currently it seems far less useful than just making them vulnerable. I then have 3 points into Serration, Compound Fracture, Evulsion with 3 from our necklace, and Rapid Ossification. Since we're spending a ton of essence in this build, I really like the idea of reducing the Bone Skill cooldowns, because I want to keep the uptime from Bone Storm up as much as possible, because we do have Bone Storm, Prime Bone Storm, which is going to increase our damage reduction, and Supreme Bone Storm, which increases our critical strike chance by 20%. Now you could also sacrifice Corpse Explosion for Bone Prison, and you would have to take a a couple of other points out, maybe from Death's Embrace or something like that, to be able to get Enhanced Bone Prison where you gain more essence, and then either Ghastly Bone to make them all vulnerable, or the Dreadful Bone Prison to gain Fortify. And then last but not least, we do have to get Ossified Essence. This is where the majority of our damage is coming from. Now for the Paragon tree. I've done a ton of experimenting with the Paragon tree. I don't know if I necessarily have it perfectly min-maxed, but I'm really happy with the results that we have so far. I went with Control as our first one because we could get so much intelligence on this first node, which 138% increased crowd control damage. And when you use Corpse Tendrils, you're going to get that 20% increased damage as well. For your second board, you're definitely going to want to get the one with Bone Graft. This is going to increase your damage as well as your maximum essence, which is in turn also going to increase your damage. There's also a ton of bonuses in here that you're going to want to grab, like increased critical strike chance with bone skills, increased critical strike damage. So you're pretty much going to want to get the majority of the things on this board, just like we have. You're definitely going to want to pick up the maximum essence here, as well as the essence on kills if you're still low on essence regeneration. Once you have enough essence regeneration, you can probably spec out of these two and gain them back somewhere else. And the glyph we have on here is Essence, which is going to increase our critical strike damage with core skills, as well as our critical strike damage when enemies are not healthy. Now, the third board that we're going to want to get, and we want to make sure that it's our third board because we only have enough additional points to be able to unlock the bonuses on these rare nodes. And we want to get these increased critical strike damage stuff. So I came down here, grabbed the critical strike damage through this, made sure to get the bonus critical strike damage here. You're also going to want to get the Scent of Death, which is going to reduce the damage you take when there are corpses nearby, but if you're shooting at range and there are no corpses, it's going to increase your damage. It's kind of a double whammy. It's awesome. And one of the things that I really like about damage to healthy enemies is I'm really shooting at range before I ever even hit them with anything else. So this increased bonus damage as well as critical strike damage is pretty huge, as well as the critical strike damage and damage to healthy enemies all around it. For my glyph in here, I do have Imbiber, and since the majority of our damage is done before things are even near us or doing any damage to us, we are healthy the majority of the time. So this increased damage is pretty awesome, and mainly just pick up all of the willpower around this board. Now, you could swap this out for other things like maybe Gravekeeper or Sacrificial if you just want more standard damage across the board. I just personally really like Imbiber at the moment. And then for our final board, we do have the Flesh Eater board. This one here can drastically increase your damage when you consume 5 corpses. You get 40% increased damage for 6 seconds. Down here, you can also pick up damage to injured enemies and critical strike damage. For our glyph, we are using the Vulnerable glyph to increase our vulnerable damage. And dealing damage to vulnerable enemies increases your damage across the board by up to 10% for 6 seconds. You can also pick up the damage to elites and stuff around here as well. So there definitely is other things you could do. I really wanted to just min-max these boards because I was getting the most damage out of it. You could add an additional board by speccing out of some of these other different things, but it really doesn't seem to be worth it. But I do really hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I will have plenty more Necromancer builds coming very soon, so keep an eye out for those. And in the description is a link to a written build over on Mobalytics if you want to check that out.